This episode of The Reality Check is brought to you by HelloFresh. Forget takeout. HelloFresh delivers all the ingredients for delicious, healthy meals anyone can prepare at home in less than 30 minutes. And HelloFresh is giving our Canadian checkers 50% off their first order. Go to hellofresh.ca and use promo code REALITY50 to get 50% off your first order. That's hellofresh.ca, promo code REALITY50. This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for June 6th, 2017, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, sugar cuboids?
Christina Roach.
Hello.
And producer Pat.
Hi, everyone.
We have a great show for you today. I'm going to look into this hoax of the conceptual penis, whatever that might mean. And Adam is going to explore whether the voice of Sailor Moon provided the Japanese voice of Wonder Woman.
That's right.
So many of those things are fictional or not. But first, can sugar in your gas tank destroy your engine? Pat?
So I got to thinking about this because of the refreshment song Banditos. Here are some of the lyrics. We'll put the sugar in the tank of the sheriff's car. We'll slash the deputy's tires. They won't get very far when they finally get the word that there's been a holdup. Nobody?
I do not know this.
Okay, so you guys aren't refreshment fans, I guess. Well, if any listeners out there gave me an out loud thanks for playing along.
They probably wanted to hear the actual music.
Was that like the next line in the song, or just acknowledgement that they understood?
It's the next line in the song.
There you go.
You guys are probably familiar with the refreshments if you've ever seen a show called King of the Hill.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
they do the theme song.
They do the theme music for King of the Hill.
what, Pat.
So they're now called Roger Klein and the Peacemakers, and there's this really cool documentary that's coming out this year called Here's to Life about the band. Their story is really kind of interesting because they broke in a big way right at that time when many labels were falling apart and record stores were going under because of the internet. So, interesting band, and I'm a fan.
So I wonder if they put sugar into the propane tank for King of the Hill.
And propane accessories.
I also think about the movie Kingpin and the scene where Woody Harrelson's character gets the news that his engine is, quote, blown, and it will cost him $2,000 because someone put sugar in his tank. That someone being Bill Murray's character. So, obviously, sugar in a gas tank must be really bad stuff. In fact, if you look up locking gas caps, the description often says something like, to prevent fuel theft, which makes sense given the price of fuel, but also vandalism. There are a lot of stories out there on the internet of people who were targets of revenge, where someone put sugar in their gas tank. There are also stories of the prank sugar in the gas tank, where someone leaves sugar around the gas cap and on the ground near the car, but they don't actually put it into the tank. So the idea is that the sugar dissolves into the gasoline, then travels into the engine through the fuel lines. Then it's heated by the engine, turning it into a gooey sludge and gumming up all the moving parts, or caramelizing and filling the cylinders, essentially destroying the engine. The truth is, though, that not much sugar, if any, is going to make it as far as the engine because it turns out sugar doesn't dissolve in gasoline.
What?
Ooh.
In 1994, Professor John Thornton at the University of California, Berkeley, mixed gasoline with sugar marked with radioactive carbon atoms. He used a centrifuge to spin out the undissolved sugar and measured the radioactivity of the gas to see how much sugar had dissolved. This turned out to be less than a teaspoon of sugar per 15 gallons of gas, which isn't enough to do much damage at all.
Huh.
That's not to say that sugar in your gas tank won't harm your car or cost you money. But this isn't specific to the chemical properties of sugar. Some other particulate matter like sand would have a similar effect. And of course, the amount of damage or hassle is very likely dependent on how much sugar is put into the gas tank and how much gasoline was there in the tank to begin with. So let's assume that someone wanted to do this to you and found a way to get past the lock fuel cap or door, one of which is pretty much on every modern car. The sugar would stay intact, and because it's heavier than the gasoline, it would sink to the bottom of the tank. This has been tested a few times. probably most famously by the Mythbusters. I also saw several YouTube videos of people testing the myth on small motors, and I'll put links of those into the show notes. Ray and Tom Magliozzi of the radio show Car Talk have discussed this many times. On the Mythbusters, they left the engine running overnight, and their conclusion on the show was that, quote, "This myth is totally busted."
And we don't care about greenhouse gas emissions.
In the YouTube videos I watched, the sugar didn't stop those engines either. So let's say that you're driving the car and you hit a bump. It is possible that some of the sugar will get suspended in the fuel, but as Ray and Tom Magliozzi explained, there are several filters between the tank and the engine that are designed to stop contaminants from reaching the engine. For example, there is a, quote, sock at the end of the pickup tube in the gas tank, and there is also a filter further up the line. The sugar would be stopped there because, again, it wouldn't dissolve in the fuel. If there is enough sugar in the tank, the filters are eventually going to get plugged up, and fuel won't be able to get to the engine, therefore stopping your car from running. If there is a lot of sugar in the tank, you may have to replace the fuel filter several times before it's cleared out.
Why several times?
Well, so if there's enough sugar, it's going to clog that fuel filter.
Yeah.
You're going to have to throw that fuel filter out and replace it. And so eventually all the sugar is going to cycle through.
Oh,
so
you might have to go through a few filters then.
Right. And of course, if you're going through several fuel filters that are getting clogged, you're also running the risk that you're going to get stranded each time that filter gets clogged to the point that your engine isn't getting any fuel. Again, the devil's in the dose here, right? Did someone put a teaspoon or a whole bag of sugar in your tank? What the Car Talk guys suggest is that if you suspect that you have a considerable amount of sugar in your tank, you're going to want to have the car towed to a mechanic who will drop and clean out the gas tank. Apparently, this is a fairly straightforward job costing between $100 and $200. No fun, but that's a far cry from the myth of needing to replace the engine or having to scrap your car altogether. So there you have it. Not quite what the myth seems to be.
Yeah, I remember hearing that quite a bit when I was younger.
The only thing sweeter than sugar is the truth. Thanks, Pat. What could be a bit more bitter, though, is a hoax. A hoax about a conceptual penis. A couple of weeks ago, there was some big news in the skeptical community due to the publication of a fake paper in a social science journal that supposedly reveals the problems of the discipline of gender studies. Others have said it reveals the problems with skeptics, who were too quick to pounce and fell prey to confirmation bias. I'll investigate what happened and the response and what to make of all this.
So I heard about this on Sam Harris's podcast, and he seemed really thrilled about how funny this was.
Yes, the May 22nd episode of Sam Harris's podcast, he was quite giddy over this.
Right.
It began with Skeptic Magazine publishing an article called The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct, a Sokol-Style Hoax on Gender Studies, by Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay. This article even had a foreword by big-time skeptic Michael Shermer, who is the editor of Skeptic, which said, quote, "Every once in a while, it is necessary and desirable to expose extreme ideologies for what they are by carrying out their arguments and rhetoric to their logical and absurd conclusion, which is why we are proud to publish this expose of a hoaxed article published in a peer-reviewed journal today. Its ramifications are unknown, but one hopes it will help rein in extremism in this and related areas." Michael Shermer. And it also had this sort of header, "The conceptual penis as a social construct is a Sokol-style hoax on gender studies." This is a reference to Alex Sokol, who in the 1990s published a completely fake newspaper in a very prestigious journal in the world of postmodernism and literary studies and stuff like that. He talked about the hermeneutics of an interpretation of quantum gravity or something like that. He kind of just made up all these different phrases and put them all together to see if it could pass through the filters of a prestigious journal and their editors, even though it was all junk. Because he disliked the idea of often these journals using scientific terms not correctly, and using a lot of vague phrasing which didn't seem to reveal truths but confuse things, but people didn't seem to care. So what was the hoax in this article? In the author's own words, quote, "Assuming the pen names Jamie Lindsay and Peter Boyle, and writing for the fictitious Southeast Independent Social Research Group, we wrote an absurd paper loosely composed in the style of post-structuralist discursive gender theory. The paper was ridiculous by intention, essentially arguing that penises shouldn't be thought of as male genital organs, but as damaging social constructions. We made no attempt to find out what post-structuralist discursive gender theory actually means. We assumed that if we were merely clear in our moral implications that maleness is intrinsically bad and that the penis is somehow at the root of it, we should get the paper published in a respectable journal. End quote. Boghosian and Lindsay describe how they came up with phrases that lacked meaning or weren't consistent or seemed to be new terms, post-patriarchal, for example. They even argue that climate change is conceptually caused by penises.
Oh my.
Yes.
Wow.
Some of their sources were fake. Some were algorithmically generated nonsense papers. They read their paper over to ensure it had no meaning, and then they were able to get it published in a journal called Cogent Social Sciences. They originally tried for another journal, but got rejected from it. The original journal, Norma, rejected the conceptual penis as a social construct, but thought it was a great fit for the Cogent series, which operates independently, but under the same overall publishing structure.
So that original journal that they attempted to publish in, was that a respectable journal?
That is more respectable, that is correct.
Okay.
Yes. In the rejection letter, the editors of Norma wrote, quote, "We feel that your manuscript would be well suited to our Cogent series, a multidisciplinary open journal platform for the rapid dissemination of peer-reviewed research and across all disciplines." End quote there. Now, Cogent Social Sciences did have peer review, some of which were complementary to this fake paper, and one of the peer reviewers asked for more sources and some minor changes. The authors added more fake sources and easily made the minor changes.
Jeez, man.
In the Skeptic piece, the two authors derive two main implications from their stunt. Number one, problems with pay-to-publish open-access journals.
Fair.
And number two, postmodernism, gender studies, and the canon of knowledge, meaning the whole thing is flawed. The question is, how valid are each of these concerns? Reading various criticisms of the piece on the internets led me to think that almost everyone sees it primarily as the first problem, with pay-to-publish open-access journals. In fact, so much so that many think the second issue isn't even valid. Phil Torres does a great overview in Salon. You can find us linked at the show notes, trcpodcast.com.
Great website.
And although Phil admits that there is a problem with pay-to-publish journals, he highlights how this is nothing new. For example, he describes, quote, John Bohannon of Science magazine submitted 304 versions of a fake scientific paper to open-access journals, including some associated with highly respectable publishing companies. He used a fake name attached to a fake institution and managed to get the paper, which had flaws that anyone with a high school diploma should have been able to detect, accepted in more than half the journals.
Wow.
So this is a systemic problem.
Yep.
Does this mean that the entire enterprise known as science is flawed? No. You'd have to publish in the top journals, of which Cogent Social Sciences isn't one. The famous Alex Sokol hoax did do this. They used the top journals, and as Torres writes, that even Sokol was more cautious and subdued about what his hoax revealed than Boghosian and Lindsay.
Yeah, he didn't say there was a fundamental problem with science. He just thought there was a problem with the journals.
Correct. In fact, the pay-for-publishing journals seem to explain most of the issue, not the confusion of what gender studies itself is. Phil makes some excellent points about how many skeptics weren't skeptical enough. Usual suspects here. Michael Shermer obviously published the piece. Richard Dawkins said this was great. Harris was gleeful on his podcast. And Pinker tweeted also this was good stuff. To be fair, Pinker later tweeted, quote, gender studies is an academic field that deserves criticism, but the conceptual penis hoax missed the mark. And he linked Phil's article. But that Norma journal was more legit, wasn't it? Why did they say to try the other journal, the Cogent Social Sciences? Well, from Slate, one of Norma's editors has since said of the paper, quote, we thought it was sheer nonsense. In their rejection note, the Norma editors suggested it might be a better fit for the lower status journal with which they share a publisher, but they have since said that that recommendation was automatically generated by a company-wide referral system and that they meant to reject it outright. Which, maybe that's true. You could say then your processes are very flawed because that's very misleading.
That's a bad policy.
No kidding.
Especially when it leads to income being generated because you have to pay for these types of things. And then this piece on Slate oddly had some reference to phallic anxiety, which was driving the authors to make this publication in the first place. People just can't seem to resist sticking in something else which isn't that rational while they're criticizing the irrationality of others.
Yep.
Boghosian and Lindsay seemed to revel in their ignorance and confusion about gender studies and various terms that are used in the field. We didn't even try to understand what these words meant. Like, really? It's one thing to be ignorant. The other is gleefully ignorant. Yeah. I think this is highly problematic. Even science articles are often impenetrable to outsiders. I think that often scientists look at the humanities and think, well, those words that they're using are similar to the words I know, because I speak English, they're using English words, therefore I know what they mean, and I don't really understand, so therefore it's junk. Versus, no, maybe they've spent decades having a system of academic exploration and understanding, and those words now have a slightly different meaning, or a context, or a history. I think it behooves scientists to be very careful when they dip their toes into other disciplines if they think they know what the words mean and they don't. But getting back to science articles being impenetrable outsiders, here's 2 sentences from an abstract in a science paper. Recent studies have shown that generalized activating systems are not restricted to the reticular formation and that non-reticular brain systems, e.g. basal forebrain, amygdala, superior colliculus, can effectively produce ECOG activation. And the muscarinic receptor antagonist scopolamine, at 1 milligram per kilogram, IP, reduced but did not abolish activation, as did the serotonergic receptor antagonist methotrexate. Now I can ask the co-hosts, do you guys know what that meant?
No clue.
I would refer them to my sister paper. What's it called? No idea.
Right. Now that is in the abstract of a publication that my name is on. And I barely remember what that means. The point is, you can easily just grab something, especially if it's like molecular biology or even math, and it becomes quickly impenetrable. Someone looking at this like, oh, I could look what those words mean. I could look up what the words, I know there's some brain areas, but then you'd have to keep looking up and you'd find more paragraphs and there'd be a context and exactly what scopolamine is and how it works. There's complexity here. So I would be like, I don't even know what that means. Ta-da! Pretty peculiar. So in conclusion, it's good to do an experiment, but you have to be careful about what conclusions you draw. It's interesting to try to put through a hoax paper, but that's done many, many times. Phil gave one example. There's another link from Pacific Standard where they provide link after link of people doing this in science papers. There's one where a guy said, get me off your effing mailing list. And that was the abstract, that was the paper, that was the content of entire. They even had a visual diagram that had a flow chart which said the same thing, and it got published. Because that's how some of these journals work. To really show that the system is flawed, you should pick the best journals with the best peer reviews. And if it goes through that, then there's a larger problem, I think, that has to be explored. In this case, the best explanation is that the pay-per-access open journal system is deeply flawed, which is nothing new, and gender studies may have problems, but that's not what this has shown.
Interesting. Actually, if you'll remember, Darren, I dug into this a little bit on predatory publishers and fake academic articles back on episode 421 as well.
Yes. I think this one's interesting because when you're criticizing people for not being rational enough, you pretty much have to have your house in order. And any misstep will be used or exploited, justifiably in some cases, against you. And here, if you have a lot of the big-time skeptics saying, haha, look at this, you're like, that's a bad interpretation of a pseudo-scientific experiment.
I would also say that after there's been a bit of time and a bit of discussion on this issue, can we still say that it's exposing the problems with skeptics? Because I think a lot of the skeptics have actually turned around on the issue. I know Michael Shermer's kind of doubled down on it, which is a bit disappointing because, usually he says things that are pretty good, although some people may disagree with that statement. I think it is nice to see that, some people see the evidence, they see that they're wrong, and they're owning up to it. And even some of those people that originally made those statements that support it are saying, publicly, it's not cool, here's why. And
yes,
I appreciate that.
Yes, good on Steven Pinker, and that's exactly what we're trying to cultivate. People aren't perfect. No one's perfect, including skeptics. We're just a bunch of people trying to figure stuff out and apply the methods of rationality, which are difficult. And it's very tempting when a juicy nugget that validates your beliefs is dangled in front of you. But, cognitive humility is something we propose on the podcast, and always good to keep in mind.
I guess this is more fuel for peer-reviewed studies, right?
You're right, Christina. But of course, there was peer review in the journal where this was published. But some people criticized the board there didn't really have the academic depth related to the subject matter of the paper.
Right.
When you say, well, why are they publishing it? Well, many journals will publish many things, especially if there's money involved. When you start with sweetness and sugar, and then you go to the penises, true or not, the only natural conclusion is end with Sailor Moon being the voice of Wonder Woman or not. Isn't that right, Adam?
This past weekend, Wonder Woman was released in North America and in many cities worldwide. This film has been a tremendous success. Over the past few days, I've seen the following bit of trivia more than once on social media. And I quote, "For the Japanese dub of the film, Wonder Woman is voiced by Kotono Mitsuishi, best known as the voice of Sailor Moon. Like Wonder Woman, Sailor Moon is a princess heroine of divine heritage and based on Greco-Roman mythology. The source of this information is the IMDb trivia page for the Wonder Woman film. A screenshot of this was shared on Twitter and retweeted over 4,000 times and liked over 8,000 times as I was preparing the segment. It had only been around for about a day. So, what is this information based on? No source is needed to add information to an IMDb trivia page, and for a new or upcoming movie, there's often information that doesn't get a chance to be vetted. So, why would one even question such a statement? Well, because Kotono Mitsuishi did the voiceover narration for the Japanese Wonder Woman trailer, which many news sources, including Sailor Moon News, that's a Sailor Moon site I run, reported on back in March.
No buzz marketing, please? Okay, just a little.
It seems likely that this information was mistakenly used as evidence that Kotono Mitsuishi, the voice of Usagi in Sailor Moon and Sailor Moon Crystal, would actually voice Wonder Woman in the Japanese language dubbed version of the film. The narration in the trailer is not the actual voice of Wonder Woman, whose English voice by actress Gal Gadot can be heard in the trailer. Am I saying her name properly?
I think you actually are, which is another thing to talk about on the show as a pseudo myth.
Oh, everyone's saying
I've been saying Gal Gadot, and someone else said it should be Gadot.
Okay.
And I don't like the sound of it, but that's her name, I think.
Okay. Internet searches for either in plain English Wonder Woman Kotono Mitsuishi or the equivalent in Japanese dug up mostly information about her having done the trailer narration, and those various articles mostly date back to late March when the trailer was released and made a lot of headlines. I found 3 pages aside from the IMDb link which mentioned that she would be the Japanese voice of Wonder Woman rather than simply mentioning the trailer. One actually links the trailer, so it's easy to ignore this one as being wrong. The others are an Italian and an Indonesian website which repeat the similar claim that I found on IMDb, so it's likely that these either were taking their information from that IMDb source or that they simply made a mistake and misattributed the trailer narration as being the dubbed voice. Now, we've talked about people not reading past the headline, but sometimes people don't read past the video description. Now, when I first heard about this trailer and I saw people sharing the trailer on social media, it just said, oh my god, it's Sailor Moon as Wonder Woman, and I thought maybe she was actually doing the voice of Wonder Woman in the trailer, but obviously upon listening to it, no, she's just narrating it, and I included that in my little write-up. Now, no cast information about the Japanese dub of the film is available on the movie's IMDb page, or on the English or Japanese Wikipedia pages for the Wonder Woman movie. So why don't we simply ask someone in Japan what Wonder Woman sounds like in that version of the film? The film won't even be out in Japan until August 25th. At the time that it's released, it'll likely be available to view either with subtitles or dubbed in Japanese, as is the case with most Hollywood movies. So, we must weigh the plausibility of this claim. Could Kotono Mitsuishi be providing the Japanese language voice for a Hollywood movie? Indeed, this claim in itself isn't that unbelievable. She has dubbed other voices of characters from North American English TV shows and movies throughout her career. Her English and Japanese Wikipedia pages have lengthy lists of her dubbing work, which includes the Japanese dubbed voices of Sarah Michelle Gellar, Jennifer Garner, Heather Graham, Kate Beckinsale, Natalie Portman, and Amy Jo Johnson. It seems quite unlikely that Kotono Mitsuishi would voice this role, as she was not the one to do the Japanese dubbed voice for Wonder Woman in Batman v Superman, which was a very recent film. We can see from the Japanese Wikipedia page for Batman v Superman that this was actually done by voice actress Yuko Kaida. It seems likely that she will be the one to voice the character for the Wonder Woman film. Actors will often dub the voices of the same actors in multiple films, especially when they are part of a series where the actors appear in more than one film. It is almost certainly untrue that Kotono Mitsuishi, the voice of Sailor Moon, will be providing the Japanese voice for Wonder Woman. While the claim is not completely implausible, the lack of evidence and the fact that another actress is voicing the role in a previous film leads us to believe that this belief was misconstrued based on this trailer. This bit of trivia is still interesting when the truth is considered, though her voicing narration of a trailer is certainly a claim which lends itself to less viral spread than a shared voice actress.
So, Adam, is the actress in both of those films the same person? Because I've seen neither.
The actress who plays Wonder Woman in Batman v Superman is the actress who plays Wonder Woman in this new film.
Gotcha.
That's like part of DC's big multi-movie tie-in, and they'll all be back with
Justice League in the fall.
Later this year.
Thanks, Adam. And thank you, listeners, for joining us once again. Pat showed us that sugar in your gas tank won't destroy your engine, but it may cause some problems for your filters, which is another issue. All that to say, particulate matter in your gas tank isn't good for your car, but it'll probably sink to the bottom. I explored the conceptual penis hoax, which seemed to really show that there's a problem with pay for access publications and not necessarily the problem with gender studies itself. It's a good idea for all of us to think more critically, especially about things that we want to be true. And Adam showed us that the voice actor that plays Sailor Moon is unlikely to be the voice actor of Wonder Woman when it's released in Japan later in August. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Stay classy, not smartassy.
Good night, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Hoax.
This past weekend, Wonder Woman. I'm gonna have trouble with that one.
Uh-oh.
And I say it about 17 times. Okay.
The voice actor of Sailor Moon did not do the voice of the Japanese version of Wonder Woman, which isn't even out yet. That's a lot of words. Pat showed us that you can put sugar in your gas tank, but maybe that's not the lead-in we want.